There is a pan soaking in your sink right now. You know the one, the heavy skillet or the roasting pan from Sunday dinner or that old cast iron piece, and it's got the film on it, not food, grease, the kind that laughs at hot water that turns your sponge slick and useless, that's still sitting there after the third go around. So you reach under the sink for the orange bottle, the degreaser, $4 or $5 of it, and you spray and you scrub and you finally get most of it, and then your hands smell like a chemical plant for the rest of the evening. I'll be straight with you. You're fighting that grease the hard way, and you're paying good money for the privilege. My name is Dale. I'm retired now. I did a lot of things in my life, spent a good stretch in pest control, did just about every kind of work a man can do with his hands, but everything I really know, the useful stuff, I learned as a boy in my grandmother's kitchen and out in my grandfather's shed. And here's the thing about that greasy pan that those two understood and that most people today have never once been told. Grease is not dirt. Grease is fat, and fat is one short step away from being soap. The old folks didn't fight grease. They turned it into the very thing that washes it off. By the time we're done, you'll be able to take the worst, blackest, greasiest pan in your kitchen and have it clean in a few minutes for pennies. Using three things very likely already in your house: no orange bottle, no fumes, no scrubbing till your arm aches. And there is one thing sitting in the cleaning aisle of your store right now that is, I promise you, almost exactly the same as what my grandfather used to make out of wood ashes and a bucket of saved bacon grease. Same chemistry. They just put it in a box and charge you for it. Stay with me for that part, especially because once you see it, you cannot unsee it. Let me show you how they did it. Here's the part nobody ever explains, and it's the whole secret. So stick with me, even though it brushes up against a little chemistry. I'll keep it plain. When you've got grease on a pan, your instinct is to treat it like dirt. Scrub it, blast it, scrape it off. And grease fights you the whole way because grease does not want to leave. It's an oil, and you've known your whole life that oil and water don't mix. You've watched the oil bead up and slide around on top of the water, never blending in, never giving up. That is exactly what's happening on your pan. The water simply cannot get a grip on the grease. So you scrub harder and you reach for something stronger, and round it goes. The old folks did not scrub harder. They changed the grease. There is a reaction, it's got a big name, saponification, and you can forget that word the second I've said it, where you take a fat, any fat, grease or lard or oil, and you introduce it to the right kind of substance, something alkaline, the opposite of an acid. And when those two meet, the fat doesn't just get washed away, it turns into soap. Real soap. The fat splits apart and recombines into the very thing we buy in bottles to clean with, because that is what soap is when you get right down to it. Soap is just fat that met the right partner. Sit with that for a second, because it's a beautiful thing, and it's the reason all of this works. The grease on your pan is not your enemy. It is raw material. Give it the right partner and it will practically clean itself off. My grandmother knew this the way she knew how to breathe. She'd have a pan with a ½ inch of bacon fat gone, cold and solid in the bottom, and where you or I might stand there feeling defeated, she'd reach into the cupboard for something that cost about a nickel. And a few minutes later, that pan was clean and she was on to the next thing. She'd never heard the word saponification in her life. She didn't need it. She knew that fat plus the right helper equals clean. And she knew the store was selling that same helper back to people at a markup. So everything I'm about to show you is really just different ways of handing that grease the right partner, some gentle, some strong. One of them you can practically watch happen. Let me give you the gentle one first, and I'll tell you where all of this comes from because it matters. Everything my grandmother and my grandfather knew, and it was so much more than pans. It was the heating, the food that stretched to feed everybody, the fixing instead of the buying, the whole art of running a full house on almost nothing. That was a way of living, a real inheritance handed down and tested over lifetimes, and it belonged to ordinary families like yours, and it got taken from us. Not stolen in the night, just quietly drowned out season after season by people selling us a separate bottle for every single thing our grandparents did with one cheap box. So I gathered all of it back into one place. Everything those two taught me, and it's called the $0 Household Bible. It's at householdbible.com, and the link is down in the description. I'm not going to keep stopping the video to talk about it. I just want you to know it's there because this pan business is one small page out of a whole life's worth of it, and you got every right to all of it. It was always yours to begin with. Start with the gentlest tool you've got because most everyday grease doesn't need the heavy artillery. Baking soda, the plain box. It costs about $1, even less if you buy the big bag, and it will quietly do more jobs around your house than any 10 bottles under your sink put together. Here's why it works. Quick and plain. Baking soda is mildly alkaline. It's that partner for the fat we just talked about, only a gentle version. And it's a soft little crystal, soft enough that it scrubs stuck-on bits without ever scratching your pan. It's softer than the metal, so it physically can't gouge it, but still gritty enough to give you real bite. So it does two jobs at once. It chips in on the chemistry, nudging some of that grease toward soap, and gives you a fine, safe scrubbing grit. So here's the everyday method. First, pour the loose grease out. Don't send a cup of bacon fat down your drain. That's exactly how you end up paying a plumber later. Pour it into an old can and let it set. Then run your pan under hot water. Not warm, hot. Heat matters more than people give it credit for because heat thins grease out and loosens its grip the same way a cold stick of butter is a brick, and a warm one spreads like nothing. Get it hot and the grease is already half beaten. Then sprinkle a good spoonful of baking soda right onto the wet pan, enough to sit on the grease like a loose paste, and then let it sit a minute, 2 minutes. Don't rush that part because the sitting is the part everybody skips, and the sitting is where the chemistry gets its start. Then take your sponge or a rag or a plastic scraper for the stubborn spots, not steel wool, and scrub. You will feel the difference under your hand. That slick, greasy, sliding drag turns into something that actually catches and lifts and comes away clean. Rinse it off. For your average greasy pan, that is the entire job. $1 box, a minute of patience, done. Now, you've seen the videos. Somebody dumps a pile of baking soda in a pan, pours vinegar over the top, and the whole thing foams up like a grade school volcano, and you think, well, look at all that. That has got to be blasting the grease to kingdom come. I'll be straight with you because honest is always better than impressive. That fizz is mostly for show. When you mix baking soda and vinegar together, they cancel each other out. The acid and the alkali neutralize one another. And what you're left with after all that bubbling is basically a little salt water. You took two genuinely useful things and turned them into one fairly useless thing and got a fun fizz as the consolation prize. The bubbles give the tiniest bit of lift. I won't pretend they do nothing, but you spent both your grease fighter and your acid to get it. Poor trade. Now, vinegar is a wonderful thing. It is just not a grease thing. Vinegar is for the chalky white scale, the hard water film, the cloudiness on your glass, the lime built up in your kettle. That is acid's job, and it does it beautifully, and it's worth its own video. But against grease, vinegar is barely trying. So don't take your two best soldiers and have them shoot each other. Put the alkali on the grease, save the vinegar for the scale, and let each one do the one thing it's good at. Now, for when the grease has been winning for a good long while. The baked on stuff, the years of buildup, the bottom of a pan that's gone black and tacky and just laughs at your baking soda. For that, you go up one level, same family, much stronger, washing soda. This is baking soda's big brother. The store calls it washing soda or super washing soda, and you'll find it over in the laundry aisle, a big box for a few dollars that'll last you the better part of a year. It is the very same idea as baking soda, the same alkaline partner for the fat, just a great deal stronger, strong enough that it doesn't merely nudge the grease towards soap. It genuinely turns it. It does that real reaction, the saponifying, the same thing my grandfather did on purpose in a kettle out back. Washing soda meets old grease and starts converting it into soap right there on the bottom of your pan. It's potent enough that I slip on a pair of dish gloves when I work with it, the same way my grandmother always kept a pair right by her sink. Not because it's anything to be afraid of, but because it's strong and it'll dry your hands right out, and an old hand learns to respect a strong tool. You've got two ways to use it. For a bad baked-on patch, make a paste about 2 parts washing soda to 1 part water and spread it onto the black spot and walk away. Give it real time, 15 minutes, 20 longer if it's bad. You're letting the chemistry do your scrubbing for you. Come back and it'll wipe away in a way that almost makes you laugh because you'll remember how hard you used to fight that same spot. For a whole greasy pan or a sink full of them, dissolve about half a cup in a gallon of hot water and let them soak. Then go have your coffee. Come back and the grease has simply let go of the metal. One honest word of caution, because I won't steer you wrong. Don't put the strong washing soda on an aluminum pan. It'll darken the aluminum and turn it dull on you. Aluminum and a strong alkali just don't get along. So for your aluminum, stay with the gentle baking soda and save the washing soda for your steel and your stainless and your oven racks. That's the one place it bites the wrong thing. And here's a little piece of kitchen magic that my wife Linda does, and I'll be honest with you, she's the one who worked it out, not me. She's the real problem solver in this house. If all you got is baking soda and you want that stronger stuff, you can simply make it. You spread your baking soda out in a thin layer on a baking sheet, and you put it in the oven at around 400 degrees for about half an hour, giving it a stir part way through. The heat drives something right out of it, and you can see it change. It goes from a fine, fluffy powder to a grainier, duller, heavier stuff, and what you pull out of that oven is washing soda, the stronger, cleaner. You just made it from the dollar box with nothing but heat. Linda runs off a tray of it every so often and keeps a jar by the stove, and she looks awfully pleased with herself about it. She's earned it. Now there is one pan that plays by its own rules, and that's cast iron, because cast iron is a whole different animal. If you've got yourself a good cast iron skillet, it's carrying what we call a seasoning, a thin, hard, slick, black layer that's been baked right into the iron over years of oil and cooking, smooth as glass, and that layer is the entire point of the pan. It's why an egg slides right across it. And here's the catch. That strong stuff I just had you go buy, the washing soda, the soaps, they will strip that seasoning right off along with the grease, because that seasoning is, in its own way, grease too. The good kind, the kind you spent years building up and want to keep. So on cast iron, you put the chemistry away. You reach for salt. This is the oldest trick in the whole book, and it's the one my grandmother used on her iron pans without ever once stopping to think about it. Coarse salt, kosher salt, the big crystal kind, the cheap box that lasts about forever. A couple of dollars, not your fine table salt. Table salt's too fine. It just dissolves on the warm pan and does nothing for you. You want the big, rough crystals. You do this while the pan is still warm from cooking. Pour a couple good spoonfuls of that coarse salt right into the pan, fold up a paper towel, and scrub. The salt is just abrasive enough to grab the stuck food and the grease and grind it loose. But here's the clever part, and it's why the old folks landed on salt of all things. Salt is softer than iron, so it physically cannot scratch the pan or hurt that precious seasoning. It scuffs off whatever's stuck, and then it stops before it can do any harm. If something's really gripping on, add a few drops of oil to make a paste and keep working it. Then tip the dirty salt into the trash. Give the pan a quick rinse under hot water and dry it right away. Cast iron and standing water are not friends, and wipe the very thinnest film of oil over it to keep it black and happy. The whole thing takes 2 minutes, and the beauty of it is that it makes that seasoning a little better every time instead of tearing it down. And while we're here, you may have heard you must never let soap touch cast iron. The honest truth is a little softer than that. A good modern dish soap won't destroy a well-built seasoning the way the old harsh lye soaps once could. But the salt is gentler. It keeps your seasoning building instead of wearing at it. So the old rule still serves you well, even if the reason behind it has eased up. And for the very worst case, the pan where something didn't just stick but burned on, fused itself to the bottom, the one you normally soak for 2 days or just give up on and shove to the back of the cabinet, let me give you the one that feels like outright cheating. You don't scrub it at all. You put it right back on the stove. Fill the bottom with an inch or two of water, add a spoonful of baking soda, and bring it up to a gentle simmer for a few minutes. What's going on is the heat and the moving water are working underneath that burnt layer and lifting it, softening the bond, holding it down, while the baking soda goes after the grease. And after a few minutes, you take a wooden spoon and give it a nudge, and that whole burnt sheet slides up off the bottom in pieces like it was never stuck at all. My grandson was helping me in the kitchen a while back, and by helping I mean mostly watching and asking why about every 30 seconds the way they do, and I showed him that one on a pan he was sure was ruined. When that black crust floated up off the bottom, he looked at me like I'd pulled a coin out of his ear. Thought his grandpa was a magician. I didn't have the heart to tell him it was just hot water and a little patience. The old folks knew the secret weapon on a stuck pan was never more elbow grease. It was always heat and water and a little bit of time. So if you want to set your whole kitchen up the old way, here's the entire arsenal. And I want you to notice how small it is. A $1 box of baking soda for the everyday, a few dollar box of washing soda for the bad jobs, a couple dollar box of coarse salt for your cast iron. That is the whole list. 3 boxes under $10 all in, and you may already own 2 of them. And those 3 plain boxes will outlast and outwork every spray and powder and orange bottle you have ever bought, and they won't gas up your kitchen while they do it. Now, I want to tell you where this really comes from, because it closes a circle, and it's the very part I promised you back at the start. My grandfather came over from Italy with next to nothing right before this whole country fell into the Depression, and that man could make or fix or stretch absolutely anything. He didn't didn't have the luxury of a choice. And one of the things he made, the way his people always had, was soap. From nothing, he saved every last bit of grease and fat the kitchen produced all year. The bacon drippings, the trimmings, the stuff we poured down the drain without a thought. All of it in a can, and he saved the ashes out of the wood stove, the fine gray ash from the hardwood, and he'd pour water slowly down through a barrel of those ashes, and what dripped out the bottom was a sharp, strong liquid. That liquid was lye. The old-timers called it potash because that's just what it is. The potash, the strong alkali, leached right out of the ashes by the water, and he would take that lye and cook it together with all that saved grease in a big kettle. And it would turn saponify, that very same reaction we keep coming back to, into soap. He made the entire family's soap out of wood smoke and bacon fat for free, exactly the way his own grandfather had taught him. Now here's the circle, the thing I told you you couldn't unsee. That washing soda I sent you to buy in the laundry aisle, it is the same family of thing my grandfather leached out of his ashes. The same kind of strong alkali doing the same job. The store did not invent it. They mined it, milled it, and put it in a box, and a great many people walk right past that cheap box to buy a $6 spray that does a worse job and leaves a smell. My grandfather would have stood in that aisle and laughed out loud. He made the strong version himself by hand out of the two things most people sweep straight into the trash. We didn't lose the chemistry. We never lost the chemistry. We just lost the knowing. And that brings me to the part of all this I think actually matters the most, more than any single trick I've given you. Why don't you already know this? You're a sharp person. Your parents were sharp. How does something this simple, this cheap, that ran every household for generations on end, just quietly vanish from memory in a generation or two? I'll tell you, and it isn't a conspiracy. There was no secret meeting in a back room. The truth is simpler than that, and honestly a little sadder. It's just money. There is no money in a $1 box of baking soda that cleans 40 different things and lasts a month. None. But there is an enormous amount of money in convincing you that you need a special bottle for the stovetop, and a different one for the oven, and a third for your pans, and a fourth just for grease, and a fifth for the cast iron, and that everyone is some marvel of modern science. You ought to rebuy the moment it runs low. Walk down that aisle sometime and really look at it. 40 feet of bottles, and a huge share of what's inside them, I am not exaggerating, is water. Plain water, a little of the same kind of cleaner your grandmother used, some thickener so it feels rich, a dye so the color seems to mean something, a fragrance so it smells like the idea of clean. You are paying $4, $5, $6 for mostly water and a good story. And the story was always the real product. The cleaner was never the point. The thing they were selling you all along is the belief that you can't do this yourself, that the answer to every little mess is something you go out and buy. Once a person believes that, they'll buy a bottle a season for the rest of their life and never question it. They just advertise the simple old knowledge into silence because there's no profit in a family that already knows how, and a small fortune in a family that's been taught it doesn't. That is all it ever was. I think about my grandmother standing at her sink. That woman never once felt helpless in her own kitchen. A pan was just a pan to her. Grease was just grease. And she had the answer to every bit of it right there in her own two hands and in a couple of cheap boxes in the cupboard. There was a quiet kind of dignity in that, in not needing anybody, in looking a problem dead in the eye and knowing all the way down that you can handle this yourself. And that's not really about pans at all, is it? That's about being a capable person in your own home. And I've come to believe that's the real thing that got taken from us. Not the recipes, those you can always look back up. What got taken was the feeling, the confidence, that bone deep sense that your home and everything in it is yours to master, not a long string of problems you rent the solutions for, one bottle at a time. My grandmother had that, and it cost her next to nothing, and she was freer in her little kitchen than a lot of folks are today with a cupboard full of expensive sprays. Given the choice, I'd take her way every time. So here's what I'd like you to actually go do this week. Plain and simple. First, go under your sink, pull out the degreaser, the orange bottle, whatever spray you've been using on your pans, and just set it up on the counter. Don't throw it away yet. Just move it out of the way so it stops being the thing your hand reaches for out of pure habit. Second, make sure you got your 3 boxes, baking soda, washing soda from the laundry aisle, and a box of coarse, kosher salt. It's under $10 for all 3 if you're starting from scratch. And like I said, you very likely already own a couple of them. Then the next time you got a greasy pan in front of you, do it the old way. Everyday grease, hot water, a sprinkle of baking soda, let it sit a minute, give it a scrub. Bad baked on grease, a paste of washing soda, let it sit 20 minutes, wipe it clean away. Cast iron, coarse salt, and a folded paper towel while the pan's still warm, then rinse, dry, and a thin wipe of oil. And the burned on disaster, water and a spoon of baking soda simmered right in the pan, and lift the mess off with a wooden spoon. That right there is the whole system. Not one part of it takes more than a few minutes, and all of it together costs less than that single bottle you just set on the counter. And here's what I want you to pay attention to while you do it. Notice there are no fumes filling your kitchen. Notice your hands don't smell like a factory floor afterward. Notice it cost you pennies. And then notice, this is the real one, that little click of satisfaction the moment the grease lets go and it dawns on you that you just did for almost nothing. The very thing you've been paying somebody else for your whole life. That feeling right there is the entire point of this. That's your grandmother's confidence finding its way back into your own hands. And once you've felt it a few times, you're going to wonder why you ever did it any other way. And that bottle up on the counter is going to quietly make its own way into the trash. Like I mentioned early on, this whole pan business is just one small page out of the entire life my grandparents lived, all of it. The heating and the food and the fixing and the saving gathered up together into the $0 household Bible over at householdbible.com with the link sitting down in the description if you find you want the rest of what those two knew. But before you head off, do me one favor, because I read every last one of these comments, and they are honestly the reason I keep making these. Tell me down below, what did your grandmother or your mother use on a greasy pan? Every family had its own version of this. Some swore by salt, some by a plain bar of soap, some by something I have never even heard of. And it tends to change depending on where in the world your people came from. So tell me where you're from and tell me the trick that got handed down in your house. I promise you I learned just as much from those comments as anybody learns from me. And do subscribe before you go, because next time I've got something even better for you. You know that rusty pitted, given up on cast iron pan, the one shoved in the back of a cabinet, or the one you spot for $2 at every yard sale and every estate sale, the one that looks like it belongs in the scrap heap? Next time, I'm going to show you exactly how the old folks brought a pan like that all the way back from the dead, rust, ruin, and all, using something most people throw straight in the garbage without a second thought, and how it ends up better than anything you could buy brand new. I think it'll surprise you what does it. Until then, this is Dale. Go easy on your hands, go easy on your wallet, and quit paying good money for what your own two hands already know how to do. I'll see you next time.